Welcome to Insider at COP26, Accelerating Action to Combat Climate Change, presented by Deloitte. Here's our host, Business Insider leadership correspondent, Marguerite Ward.
Hi, I'm Marguerite Ward, correspondent at Insider. It's an honor to be your host for today's event, Insider at COP26, Accelerating Action to Combat Climate Change, presented by Deloitte. In just a few days, global business leaders and policymakers will convene for COP26, the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, and the stakes could not be higher. Scientists confirmed in the latest IPCC report that the world is falling behind in the race to combat climate change. Insider, in partnership with Deloitte, is here to talk with a few key people leading the charge for change in the US and beyond. We'd love for you to be a part of the conversation by using the hashtag InsiderAt. Also, you can submit questions for our panelists through the dashboard at the bottom of the screen. We also want your feedback, so in the dashboard you'll see an icon for our survey. You can take it at any time during or just after the event. And now I'm delighted to introduce my guests. Jennifer Steinman, leader of Deloitte's Global ESG Marketplace. Valerie Smith, Chief Sustainability Officer at Citi. And Charles Orgbone III, climate activist, author, and sustainability and social innovation strategist for Deloitte. Welcome. I want to start with you, Charles. Back in 2008, when you were just 12 years old, you founded Greening Forward, which would become one of the country's leading youth-driven environmental organizations. Now you consult with companies on environmental practices. What's your message to the attendees of COP26? Feel free to be as broad or as specific as you want.
Yeah, so we've been having these conferences for so many years now, right? And the message has always been the same, is we need to act quickly for climate change. We need to mobilize resources to solve this pressing issue that is so interconnected to many other issues that our society around the globe faces. I think what's really important is that we start to bring people into the conversation who don't know what COP26 is, right? Who don't know a lot about climate change or how they can make an impact. I think sometimes even maybe the people that are listening might understand the lingo sometimes of like what we're going to say on this panel, but I think really our challenge is really getting out the word and the message to people who are not traditionally engaged in these conversations, because we're going to need a greater pool of support to really mobilize effectively around climate change.
Absolutely. Jennifer, you're Deloitte's Global ESG Marketplace leader. Going off of what Charles just said, tell us briefly, what is ESG and what is an ESG marketplace, and how does it help us fight climate change?
Thanks for the question, and I agree with what Charles just shared as well. ESG stands for environment, social, and corporate governance. And actually putting those three things together is really important in the context of the work that we need to do to help affect climate change. And so when we think about it from a marketplace perspective, that's just a designation from within Deloitte that focuses on what we're doing to serve our clients. So I serve our clients in the marketplace around ESG.
Awesome. And what's your message to COP26 attendees?
I do agree with what Charles just shared, and just thinking about the topic broadly, it's really the defining issue of our generation. And there is no single company, industry, individual that can solve it alone. And so I think the big message is that we need to come together. We need to work together and take immediate action. It's important for businesses and governments to work together. It's important for us to think about things differently and start to develop processes where we can really accelerate the impact. And summits like COP26 are really critical to that. And moving from commitments also to action is really one of the key things, I think, coming out of COP26.
I love that, moving from commitment to action. Valerie, you're the Chief Sustainability Officer at Citi, helping one of the world's most important financial institutions become more sustainable. Same question, what's your message to COP26 attendees, and how do you think it will play out?
Yeah, thank you, Marguerite. And it's great to be here with all of you. And, I'll echo what my fellow panelists have said. I think the first message would be the urgency that I think we all see and feel on a daily basis now. I think the second message would be, on the action point, that the private sector and civil society are really coming to Glasgow en masse, in force, to showcase both commitment and action. It's really important that we also know that we're there to support the very difficult negotiations that will be happening. COP26 first and foremost is about negotiating some of the, the details and ratcheting up commitments from the member countries. And I think as we look at the commitments that you see coming out of the private sector, the urgency that we see coming out of all sectors, including civil society, we know that we really need enabling public policy and leadership from governments to provide the environment where these commitments can be achieved, where we can, ratchet down emissions and land at a 1.5 degree global warming situation in 2050. So I think the fundamental message is that we need to be here to support and create the urgency for government and the negotiators to get the job done at COP26.
Valerie, do you think this year will be different from previous years? As we started talking, Charles mentioned that we've been having these conversations for years now. Climate change, the climate crisis isn't new. How do you feel about this year particularly?
Well, I think apart from the fact that, what we've learned recently from the most recent IPCC report from climate scientists, the urgency, I think, is real and is, felt across sectors now. But I think also what we've seen is the incredible groundswell of commitment. So you see, many companies, obviously cities in this mix as well, making net zero by 2050 commitments, committing to transition our own businesses in alignment with where climate science tells us we need to go. And I think that we've really seen over the past 2 to 3 years this significant shift. And I think it's a significant shift in society, and it's a significant shift in the business community. And I think that in this crazy way, COVID and the tragedy that continues to be experienced from COVID has really been an accelerant for climate change and for climate action. This sense of nature being out of control, of the need for collective action to really solve these huge societal problems, whether it's fighting COVID or fighting climate change. I think that is another piece that to me feels new and different, and has resulted in a whole new level of commitment and action.
Right. During COVID, as it continues, thousands of people were quarantining, social distancing at home. And so you had that moment where people could really reflect and see the news, see what was going on in the environment across the globe and in the US. Jennifer, before your current role in ESG, you were Deloitte's Chief Transformation Officer, leading strategy and innovation. Your role and job was to tackle big problems and prepare for the future. How are you applying that same mindset, problem solving, to your job today?
It's interesting, as we looked to define what transformation was for us at the time, we decided to study what other companies were doing. And so we did a bit of a back of the envelope exercise and looked at 37 companies that were in various stages of transformation. And what that suggested was that you transform from a position of power, meaning the time to transform is not when your organization is facing challenges, it's when you are on an upswing. And so, clearly the question around climate is posing challenges to all businesses and how they reflect and think about creating sustainable futures. But I think the way we looked at transformation, the way I apply it to this role, is how can we help organizations actually move ahead based on a position of strength. So that's one thing. And then the second area is really thinking about how you organize around that transformation. And so looking at it from an end-to-end perspective, thinking about navigating pressures such as investors, the regulatory environment, government, how consumers are interacting with the organization, the increasing pressures from different stakeholders, including internal stakeholders, looking at it from a holistic perspective and thinking about how that transformation is most affected is really important in this question as well.
Jennifer, I love that you bring a really holistic perspective, like you just mentioned. You're working with some of the biggest Fortune 500 companies to get them to buy into ESG, to push them further. How are you feeling right now? Are you feeling hopeful about the future working with these clients? Do you feel that there's a lot to go? Is it a mix?
If I think about where we are right now, I'm really encouraged by the commitments that we're seeing many organizations make. And I think Val was alluding to this as well. There's a groundswell of activity. And so that's incredibly important. And one of the things Deloitte does episodically is a climate check survey. And our most recent one, we looked at 750 executives globally. And we saw through that survey that 60% of them believe that we're at a tipping point with climate change. And despite the economic downturns that we've had, as well as the pandemic, 25% of those executives are planning to accelerate their climate actions. And so I think that's really important in terms of the positive side of what is happening and what I believe is important to the question. The however is that we really need to be accountable for those commitments. And I think forums such as COP26 can help press the accountability and put in place more structure around how we go from those commitments to the actions we take to measuring those actions and the impacts that they have.
Valerie, I'm going to turn to you in just a second, but Charles, I'm really curious. You bring a really interesting youth perspective. You've been in this movement for years with Greening Forward. You created a blueprint for companies to follow. Do you think that COP26 will capture the youth urgency here that's presented?
So I started, Greening Forward that helps young people take action against environmental issues in their communities. But no longer do I qualify as a young person by the UN's definition that you have to be 25 or under. So I devote my time to really supporting young people who are at the forefront of this movement. And I think that's one of the very actionable ways that everyone listening and everyone that's involved in the climate movement can really support our just transition, is really looking to young people and empowering them. What does that mean? That means thinking about where you donate your dollars to and giving them directly to young activists, thinking about where you volunteer your time, and thinking about youth-driven organizations that need your help and your support and your mentorship. Because I don't think that young people have to wait until they're experts to be invited into the conversation. The fact is that the reality exists now, that like they're living in a world that has a very uncertain future, and we can start preparing them for that right now. And I think the messages we've heard from young people are not new. Greta Thunberg really shocked all of us, and we were all mesmerized. But Severin Suzuki said the same thing in 1992. And we don't have a lot to say about like the that there's not much that's changed. The situation has worsened. And so it's going to take giving up a lot more of what we already have to really achieve that. And so, I appreciate what one of my fellow panelists said earlier about like corporations taking action and wanting to accelerate their impact. But I would just challenge, like, how do we quantify that? Because I think there's more that we could be doing.
So you're really saying to encourage corporate leaders, CEOs, to invest directly in youth activists.
Exactly.
Valerie, you've been in sustainability for years, growing, if you will, with Citi for several years now. So you've seen what it takes to make big change inside corporate America. What's something corporations in general are doing really well right now? And from your perspective, what's something that needs to change?
A great question. So yes, I joined Citi in 2004 into the sustainability function and have really, been able to grow and grow with the program, and have seen such a significant shift over the past, I would say, 2 to 3 years, as I mentioned earlier, both in terms of how companies, like the caliber and ambition of the commitments that companies are making, but also the way that companies are reorganizing themselves. So, for example, Citi has restructured some of our key business units to be focused on helping our clients to transition, using banking and advisory services to help to finance and facilitate those transitions. I think, to sort of build on the point that Jennifer made, and you asked around, what should companies be doing more of? Well, I think we do need more commitments from more economic actors. We're really just at the tip of the iceberg in terms of the types of commitments that we need from the public sector as well as from the private sector. But then I think, digging into those commitments, and this is work that Citi currently has underway, what does net zero emissions mean for a bank? Well, it means, net zero operations. We have about 7,000 facilities in 97 countries. That's a big exercise in and of itself. We're targeting 2030. It also means net zero emissions associated with our financing, our core business. And that really means helping our clients to achieve net zero with us. It's a massive exercise around measurement, around quantification. I think, Charles would probably agree with me that there's incredible demand, including from youth, to have companies present their information about, be really transparent about how they are, what progress they're making, even where it's harder than expected, because this is very hard work that we're all engaged in and embarking on. So I think what I would ask and recommend is ambition combined with, I think, honest commentary around how hard this is, what the challenges are, and importantly, really importantly, continued engagement and transparency. I think in this moment where we're all working on business transformations, as Jennifer said, it feels so tempting to take this off into a black box and, work it. But I think to really accelerate our progress, we have to be working it while we are sort of inviting, others to be on this journey with us, whether it's our clients or our stakeholders.
I think your point on transparency is so important. I come from a diversity, equity, and inclusion background in my reporting, so I report on how companies are transforming DEI and making companies more equitable. I think we have the same issue with climate change and the climate crisis. Companies need to get comfortable being uncomfortable, sharing their transparency data around this is where we're at in terms of emissions, fossil fuel partnerships. And so I think we're going to have a lot more uncomfortable conversations. Valerie, do you think CEOs are ready for that?
I think this is such a great point, Marguerite. And in fact, well, I think speaking generally, the business community is getting ready for that. But speaking specifically to Citi, we have, and our CEO, Jane Fraser, has specifically said we need to get comfortable with this uncomfortable disclosure around, continuing representation goals, diversity goals, the pay gap analysis that we've been publishing for a number of years now, which I think has really, both been a beacon for becoming transparent with uncomfortable information, as well as action plans for improve our performance. And we've really taken that to heart, I think, with regard to our climate transparency as well. So, first of all, getting very comfortable with the data and understanding where our business is today, and then being willing to be transparent around, where we're headed and some of the big challenges ahead of us as we move toward our own net zero commitments. So I definitely see, obviously there's a ton of connections in the climate change space with social issues, and climate change really is a people issue. But I think also we can learn a lot from some of the progress we've made in recent years in the DEI community and movement, and apply that to some of what we have ahead of us in the climate change space as well.
Exactly. That was the next topic I wanted to talk with you all about, how it's a people topic, a people issue. Charles, in addition to being an environmental consultant and expert, you're a Black man who is also openly queer. How does your identity shape your work, and how does that shape what you're telling companies about how this crisis is not just an environmental crisis, but a humanitarian one?
Sure, yeah. I like to say that I'm not a tree hugger, I'm a people hugger. I think that really, as far as it goes with climate change, the Earth will still be here even through climate change and the catastrophic disasters that human beings are contributing to. It's really our own humanity that we're really fighting for here. And climate change is going to be some calculus of um, mitigation, adaptation, and human suffering, and how we act today is going to tip the balance on which of those are we going to experience more of. And that experience is not going to be equal across different communities as well. We're going to see that communities of color, low-income communities, communities that have been marginalized, are going to experience climate change and the worst effects of it more so than other communities. I'm able to see those interconnected systems, and how justice is really needs to be a part of all of these conversations.
Yeah, there really is an intersectionality that CEOs need to talk about and confront. There's so much data that shows that the climate crisis is and will impact historically marginalized communities, like you just said. Do you think business leaders are really getting that the climate crisis is inextricably linked to DEI and human rights?
Not necessarily, because the corporate community is still trying to get its head around DEI as a concept, and also climate change. And I think it's there's some inertia in putting those two ideas together.
Absolutely. Jennifer, what's your take on that? You consult with so many companies every day.
Starting with your last question around how the conversation has changed, and then leading into this question around equity, I think they're intertwined, and both Val was saying it in the context of the experience at Citi. This is really complex, and it took us many years, and it took each organization many years to get to where we are. And then we're trying to figure out what to do. And in a sense, what does a commitment mean for my organization, for my industry? Then, how do I even have the data that I need to be able to look at this problem? Do I understand it? And then what do I do about it? And at what pace, how quickly, what do I need to do in order to make sure that I honor those commitments? How much change? Where is the change most impactful? All of that's really complicated. And then you layer on top of that the fact that we're still trying to actually properly define what equity means in the context of corporations, properly measure that as well, and set objectives that we're transparent about. And to Charles's point, you put those two things together, and it's really hard to do. And I very much like the notion of us not setting an endpoint. This is going to be continuous transformation, and also being very systematic about when we make certain commitments, not to isolate them. And part of this is we compartmentalize in organizations. That's a natural thing to do, but we need to get much better at putting things together. And from an equity perspective, as we think about the transformation that organizations need to undertake in order to honor those climate-related commitments, not to limit it at that, but to also think about the unintended consequences and what our roles and responsibilities are, and have that be within the scope of the discussion as well, not something we do later once the action's been taken.
And going back to a point you just said, I think is really important to have these conversations intersect. So it's not just a chief sustainability officer working in a silo, but it's that person communicating with the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion, communicating with human resources to enact policies. Is that sort of what you were alluding to?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Valerie, Citi recently saw Jane Fraser take the helm as new CEO, as you mentioned. On her first day, she announced the company would achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions in its financing activities by 2050. Give me a little insight into what it's been like working with and for her. How has she shifted the conversation?
Well, it has been really amazing, I think, to see both institutionally the build up to that announcement, to have Jane Fraser decide to make this her day one commitment. And then I think importantly to see how that leadership from Jane really galvanized the company. I mentioned earlier, I alluded to some reorganization that we've been doing, and it's partly designed to break down these silos. So, just sort of focusing on our banking teams for a moment, we created about a year ago now a sustainability and corporate transitions team, which is focused on advising clients and advising different industry groups of bankers on how clients should begin to think about transitioning from a climate perspective, also from a broader ESG perspective. More recently, we took our businesses focused on energy, power, and chemicals, combined those teams into a group that is now focused on natural resources and clean energy transitions, with the understanding that transitions for power companies might mean transitioning to more renewable electricity generation. Transition for an energy company could mean, for an oil and gas company, could mean looking more like a power company. This is all part of the same value chain, and we really need to think about it holistically. I think the other change that Jane's leadership is bringing about touches on not just the ambition, not just the net zero commitment, the commitment to really work hard with others in our sector to help to define what net zero means for a bank. We joined something called the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which was being put together and gathering up members in advance of COP26 to put out the guardrails. Here's what net zero for a bank looks like. Here's what good targets between now and 2050 look like for your emissions associated with your financing. So we are all learning how to count, to report, to measure this information real time. It's important for tracking our progress. And so I've really appreciated, under our new leadership, building on past leadership, definitely, this dual focus on commitment, but also on the hard work and the transparency about what we're doing to get there.
There's no doubt that addressing the climate change crisis is going to take a lot of hard work and time. Here's a question I do want to ask for all of you, and I'll start with you, Valerie. How do you respond to critics who are saying you're not doing enough or you're not doing enough quickly enough? How do you respond to that, just because there's lives at risk here?
It's a great question, and it's probably the most challenging question that we receive, because on the one hand, we've set out our high level ambition. We're working on our targets and milestones for getting there. How do we demonstrate that we are helping our clients to transition? I think this is a really important topic, and it's really hard to communicate because we do all feel the urgency. And so really what we're doing is, again, start with the high level ambition, determine through engagement with our investors, with stakeholder groups, what are the proof points that we need to demonstrate as a bank that we are making good on our commitment, that we are making progress. And so really what I ask for when we engage with communities and individuals that are asking us to move faster is I explain what we're doing, I explain our commitment to transparency. You know, we have a long track record in the sustainability space, working on environmental and social issues more broadly. We are building off of that track record. We're not starting from scratch. And you know, we will be publishing and engaging along the way. I think that's an important part of the conversation that we'll be continuing to have at COP26 as well. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're doing it. We will be continuing to report on our progress through engagement. We're getting smarter about how to do that as well.
Jennifer, I'm going to toss the same question to you. How do you deal with this urgency with critics who say that consulting on ESG might not be enough?
I think the way Val decomposed it makes a lot of sense to me. And the way we've approached it at Deloitte is as a first step, really taking a look at ourselves. And so we've made some very public commitments and also very transparent about where we are in our own journey. And that really helps create a degree of empathy as we have conversations with our clients and trying to help them succeed in this journey as well. And I'll give you a couple of examples of what we've done. So we've put in place training for all of our professionals. We've got about 345,000 professionals worldwide on climate. And if you think about that from a bottoms up and a next generation of leadership perspective, that is really the intention behind it, is to get this whole generation of future leaders educated so that it becomes ingrained in what they do on a day-to-day basis and how they help serve our clients. It also gives them a sense of power in the sense that they know what actions they might be able to take individually to have an impact as well, because there are impacts at multiple levels: personal, professional, organizational, government, society. And so all of those things are really important to this. Right. And we are then also collaborating, similar to what Val described with Citi. We're collaborating with the vendors that we use and in helping them figure out what to do and holding them accountable potentially for encouraging them, educating them, and helping them think about establishing science-based targets as well. So we can do more, we should do more, we will do more, but I think the groundwork for that is there, and the intention certainly is there as well.
Absolutely. Charles, I spoke with Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, earlier this year. He told me that he's cautiously optimistic that this point of the climate crisis will yield innovation in technology and policies. Do you agree? Are we in a period of innovation, or is it crisis?
Sometimes innovation is the child of crisis, and it's really up for us to choose. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Jennifer, what's your take on the next 5 years with regards to the climate crisis? Are you hopeful? Are you worried? Or are you somewhere in between, like Charles just said?
I think that's a fair categorization, is somewhere in between. Hopeful because there's so much activity. And I do believe that there's a lot of innovation, in particular as we look at the role that technology has played and can play going forward. There's a level of complexity associated with making this happen, both in terms of the commitments that organizations make and then how we follow through on those commitments. And so the part of it that I think is important, and we've alluded to in this conversation, is that we need common frameworks, definitions, and we also need global solution for standard setting and the accountability aspect of this and the need for transparency that we've already discussed. So from a Deloitte perspective, we look at the IFRS, which is the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation, and the work that they do, and helping support what would ultimately be a common set of standards. I think that's going to be really important as we move forward.
I think you both bring up really crucial points that innovation can come out of a time of crisis. I think we witnessed that, wouldn't you say, back this past year and a half with COVID, and as it continues, as well as with the Black Lives Matter movement. We saw a moment of crisis after the murder of George Floyd. We're in a crisis point with the IPCC report. The world is literally on fire. Valerie, would you agree that innovation can really come from this time? And how are you a part of that?
I do agree that innovation can come from this time. I think, the climate movement can be a tough place, right? There's a lot of gloom and doom associated with climate, and, the facts in front of us are pretty dire. However, I think I think that this is an optimist's place, right? Like working on this agenda, whether it's from Deloitte's vantage point, Charles' vantage point, City's vantage point, you really need to lean in with hope and optimism. And I think there are really a couple of areas that give me hope. And I do agree, the youth movement looks different from the past, and I think has such a clarity of voice that gives me hope. The technologies that we need to solve climate change are all with us today. They're not all commercial, but we know what they are. And there are a few even lingering on the side that could rapidly scale up. So I think that what gives me hope is that we have the tools available. We just need the collective commitment to really ratchet those tools up, to scale that technology. City has some substantial commitments in this space. We have a $1 trillion sustainable finance goal. A big piece of that is focused on environmental and climate solutions. So, how can we collectively, first of all, have the policy ambition that really creates the infrastructure for us to have that technology rapid scale up to solve climate change.
And I think it's so important that you three are coming from different vantage points, but you have a common goal and you have so much power in terms of the technology and the suppliers and the partners you work with. Do you think there could be a ripple effect? And I'll point that to you, Charles. Do you think there could be a ripple effect of COP26 really dialing up the heat and creating those changes for other companies?
Possibly. I also kind of want to respond to Valerie's point about like the youth movement being different. And I think that's related to this question too, because I'm not quite sure that the youth climate movement is really different. I do think that what's different is that we're paying attention to young people and young people's voices differently. And I think that that is related to how much of a crisis we're in. I think we're at a place where we're desperate and hungry for optimism, new energy, new voices. And I think that that has allowed us to be more open to what young people are saying today, which young people of every generation have always been saying. And I think that the ripple effects that you're speaking of, Marguerite, are also possible because as we recommit ourselves to solving the climate crisis, we'll also realize the necessity of working with partners and creating some of those ripple effects.
I love that. And the partners include youth activists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Jennifer, is there one thing you're looking to come out of COP26? Is there a specific policy proposal or plan that you're looking at?
I think when I think about a successful COP26, we definitely need to see more formal decarbonization pledges and commitment to action by the biggest emitters, both businesses and governments, and then commitments to finance poorer nations' transitions away from fossil fuels. I think that's really quite important coming out of this. And from a Deloitte perspective, given our work in this space, we're hopeful that we start to see more standardization around how we think about ESG metrics and bringing that to the forefront so that we have something consistent, comparable, as a critical part of how we look at evaluating corporate sustainability and progress globally. And the COP26 delegates, I believe, can play a really significant role in globally issuing these metrics. And it's my hope that when we start to have this commonality around language, around definition of what success looks like, around how we're going to measure, that we will then be in a better position to look at the data and the insights coming from that data. And then to your last question, that allows us to then come together and actually create more innovative solutions to tackle some of these biggest challenges.
Absolutely. Valerie, what are you looking for specifically from COP26?
Well, just to build on some of the comments that were just made by my fellow panelists, I think of COP26 in three phases. And the first is the acceleration of commitments from companies, from countries that you're seeing in advance of COP26. Events like COP26 are very helpful deadlines for all of us. We all are good at working toward deadlines, and I think some of the recent activities and commitments you've heard from different participating countries is a great start in terms of that, ratcheting up of ambition. And then when we arrive at COP26, I think one of the most important areas that we'll be looking at is around the point that Jennifer made around climate finance. The world made the commitment in 2009 at COP15, $100 billion a year in climate mitigation and adaptation finance from developed countries to developing countries. I think this commitment is really central to continuing to have the buy-in and the action from the developing world, which still needs to develop, while also protecting themselves from the worst impacts of climate change. And then sort of to the ripple effect question that you mentioned earlier, I think what we can expect and hope to see following COP26, sort of this third piece, is we've had these commitments. We hopefully will have this galvanization at COP26 in terms of the will to do even more action. How does that flow through? How does it flow through the global economy? The commitments that banks are making, that investors are making, flows through to their companies. How does the commitment, and the action taken with the youth movement, with civil society, how does that flow through to communities? So I think these ripple effects after COP26 will be equally important to what's happening now and what we see at the actual event.
And Charles, same question. What are you looking to come out of COP26, specifically focused on the youth movement?
Yeah, a recommitment of resources to youth-driven environmental movements. That means young people who are at the helm of leading the environmental movement. There are so many examples out there. I think there are famous people that we become really fascinated by, but a lot of young people in local communities even are taking action against climate change.
Right.
And some of the organizations you might be able to find through Greening Forward.
Wonderful. I want to have another broad question before we turn to Q&A. Despite recent gains in energy efficiency and cuts in emissions, the United States is historically the biggest gas emitter on the planet. How are you changing the national conversation on the climate crisis? Jennifer, I'll start with you.
It's hard for me not to look at that question globally. So I'll sort of answer starting there, because I do believe that as we look to tackle the problem, even in the United States, that we can learn a lot from what's happening around the globe. And we actually have at Deloitte Economics Institute that has been working on publishing a series of papers around the globe called The Turning Point. And it's reports that are geography based. The one on the Americas is coming up. It hasn't yet been published, but coming soon. And it really seeks to look at the importance of taking immediate and aggressive actions by government and businesses alike. And what we are finding, all of this data-driven with a significant amount of primary research behind it, is that the cost of inaction is significant. And then correspondingly, the opportunity associated with action, back to one of your first questions around transformation, is also significant. So our European report, which is just launching this week, found that acting now to address climate change, Europe stands to increase GDP by about 730 billion euros by 2070. And our Asia Pacific report, which launched in August, had even more staggering findings, revealing how the region could gain 47 trillion US dollars in economic value over 50 years. And so, as I mentioned, our US report and our Americas report is coming soon. But part of the role that I think an organization like Deloitte can play is really shedding light on some of the opportunity associated with action, as well as the cost associated with inaction. And we do quite a bit more, but taking a really data-driven approach is one of the things that I think will help drive change, in particular in the United States.
Awesome. Now it's time for our audience Q&A. Let's kick it off and load up those questions. Our first one coming in is about corporate greenwashing. It says that corporate America's actions, according to this user, are feel-good responses to public pressure and potential misinformation, especially misinformation sometimes from the oil and gas industry. How can we push these actions beyond the feel-good and into the do-good? Valerie, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this, and I'm glad that the question was asked, because I know that while the topic of greenwashing has been around for a long time, it is now such an incredible area of focus, and I think is useful in ensuring that we are all holding ourselves and companies are holding themselves accountable for making good on their commitments. And so I think what I would say is there's been such incredible activity and attention in the ESG and especially the climate change space. That is now starting to settle from commitments to action. And so my response to the, questions around greenwashing that I think are very fair, it's really similar to the responses to some of the previous questions and the key points that you're hearing during this panel. You have to follow your commitments, make your commitments with ambition. Follow those commitments with engagement, hard work, and transparency, and to build on Jennifer's point, disclosure. And disclosure where it's, easy for investors and the public to understand the progress that companies are making and compare them to others. Climate change is about innovation, but climate change disclosure shouldn't be about choosing your own adventure. We do need, I think, a common template for disclosing our progress, our metrics, as well as disclosing our ambitions.
Yeah, Charles, I saw that you were nodding your head. Do you want to tackle the same question on greenwashing? I think you come from a really interesting perspective of being an activist, of being connected to those youth activists, but also working with corporate clients. Do you feel that we're moving past greenwashing? What's your take?
One of the really cool roles of nonprofits is being able to mobilize people around causes and really bring awareness to issues that even governments and businesses may not be prioritizing. And so when I think about the ecosystem of like nonprofits and government and business and how we all play different roles, that we need to work with each other, that sometimes business can operate at a larger scale and faster. And sometimes governments also need to create the policies that make businesses operate at that bigger scale. Sometimes there are businesses that are just as big as governments in some instances, but governments and businesses can create abuses against our environment, against people, and nonprofits can really alert us to like what that is and really mobilize um, communities and whole nations around a better solution. Um, and so I think that we just have a lot more access to information, awareness, transparency, which does help identify those greenwashing moments easier. Thankful for many nonprofit organizations for I like to think that they're partly responsible for that. They're largely responsible for that in many cases.
Yeah.
So I think corporations are also learning that they have to be more careful in what they say because people are listening, people are watching.
Exactly, people are really listening. The next question is about the key challenge to achieving low carbon sustainability. Jennifer, do you want to address what is a big problem in achieving or a key obstacle in achieving low carbon sustainability?
I think we've alluded to this in the conversation that we've had so far. It really is around setting those objectives and tackling the issues across a whole constellation. And Charles was just talking about the number of parties involved in making it happen. The solution to it, which is really what we're trying to work on and help our clients with at Deloitte, is not unilateral in nature either. And so we've been talking about a system of systems and the need to work together across multiple organizations, collaborating cross industry in a way that's not happened before, working with government entities, and to Charles's point, taking note of what is happening in the nonprofit community. All of those things together allow us to deal with some of the biggest challenges associated with decarbonization.
Absolutely. Let's take one last question and let's see what's coming through. Let's see. This one's an interesting one. Do corporations have a responsibility to push for government policy on climate change? Often, this conversation is the other way around, governments encouraging corporations. What about the other way? Let's start with you, Charles. Do corporations
Yeah,
have a responsibility?
indeed. I mean, corporations have already elected to involve themselves in politics, right? So I think there is a responsibility with that as well. And I mean, corporations, unfortunately, are vested in a lot of the fossil fuel extractive economies that are going to delay our progress against climate change, right? Just as corporations have embraced that sort of involvement and lobbied for that sort of economy that we're built upon, I think corporations can also decide to flip the script on that and to also take a different path with investing in a more just transition. And that also means engaging politically. I mean, there is, that we all know, right? There's a bill in Congress right now that in the United States where we could have greater investment around climate change, greater investment around transitioning our energy infrastructure. And that is all vulnerable right now. We may not get that investment. And I would like to see the corporate community actually take a bigger involvement in that.
I think that's a really important message to end on. Thank you again, Valerie, Jennifer, and Charles, and thank you to our presenting partner, Deloitte. I personally found this conversation not only incredibly informative, but inspiring. We learned about what leaders need to do to help abate the climate crisis, how companies can be more inclusive in their environmental policies, and what a successful COP26 actually looks like. These are topics we'll continue to cover at Insider, so be sure to follow us. And remember to share your thoughts using the hashtag InsiderAt. In a few moments, our survey will pop up on your screen, and we'd love to hear your feedback. And thank you again for joining. Have a great day.